Go. All right, again, welcome to today's presentation. Thank you for being here. At OLLI, we believe learning should never end, and we like to make these presentations available to the community because we have friends of OLLI who support this program. Thank you to those folks who do give either a sustaining gift or just a one-time gift. Any amount is helpful to help us keep these kinds of presentations going. I'm going to skip the polling question for now. I'm going to ask it at the end of my little slideshow here. OLLI classes are designed for lifelong learners, and we are currently at 800, a little over 800 members. We have a membership goal every year of 1,000 members, and membership year ends at the end of June. So we're still hoping to get those 200 more members. That's what the Osher Foundation requires for each OLLI program. And there's 125 programs across the nation. So we're part of a big network, and we'd love to see our membership reach 1,000 this year. So if you're not an OLLI member, please consider joining. It's an investment in lifelong learning in the community. Also, we have to thank our wonderful volunteers, some of them who are in the room today, for all of their support and all the ways they give to OLLI through their time and skills. Thank you to all of you. And we believe learning should never end. I'm going to launch this poll, and we can, if you'll answer it, and we will get started. Jane can go ahead and introduce the speakers today, and I'm going to stop sharing right now. But the poll is open, and we hope that you will respond so that we can let the Osher Foundation know how our members are participating. So thank you. Jane, you can go ahead and introduce the guests, and I'll turn the poll off in just a second.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for coming to today's presentation as part of the OLLI Brown Bag Lunch Program. Cliff Johnson is one of our speakers. He's supervising planner, and he has worked for Humboldt County for over 15 years, helping businesses and residents to navigate the county and state regulatory framework, which can be challenging. Since 2018, he has helped manage the county's cannabis permitting program. Natalynne DeLapp is Humboldt Cannabis Growers Association co-founder and executive director, and she brings more than a decade of experience in organizational development and management and community organizing to the table. Prior to stepping into the role of executive director, she acted as the Growers Association operations director from 2016 to 2020. She's worked with nonprofits and trade associations on project-based public relations strategies and election campaigns. She holds a degree in environmental science and public policy from Humboldt State University, now Cal Poly Humboldt. The Humboldt County Planning and Building Department regulates the cannabis industry in the unincorporated areas of the county. So what he'll be able to tell you today applies basically mainly to the county. And I appreciate everyone coming and our speakers, and it's all yours, Cliff.
Okay, well, thanks, Jane. As she mentioned, I'm Cliff Johnson, and actually my title has recently changed to planning manager, but that's a very recent change. For the last 5 years, I've been a supervising planner and overseeing the county's cannabis permitting program. I've been working for the county for over 15 years, and so in that time, I've been involved in watching the ordinances get developed, watching our response to the various state laws, and really starting to interact with a lot of our cannabis farmers as they tried to come out of the shadows and into the legal market. So I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation that I have, and I think Natalynne DeLapp is here as well. She's going to jump in as she feels that she has information to share. So one of the things that, just to kind of put you in a, here we go. So some cannabis production estimates that were developed over the last couple of years. The statewide cannabis production was estimated at about 13.5 million pounds in 2016. And the North Coast area, which is Del Norte, Humboldt, Mendocino, Lake, Sonoma, Napa, and Marin County was estimated to have about 4.15 million pounds of cannabis being produced in 2016. The more recent information that we have for statewide cannabis consumption was about 1.4 to 2.5 million pounds in 2018. So you can see that just the North Coast area alone was producing more cannabis than was being consumed statewide. And Humboldt County, before 2016, was estimated to have as many as 15,000 cannabis grow sites, just in Humboldt County alone. In 2015, as a result of some assembly bills that made their way through the state assembly, Governor Brown signed the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act. And it went into effect on January 1st of 2016. Later, that would incorporate some of the elements of what most people call Prop 6, or refer to as Prop 64, which was legalized the adult use of cannabis. And so really right now what we're dealing with is a medical and adult use cannabis regulation and safety act, I think is the framework. We refer to it as MACURSA. But in the beginning of 2016, it was for medical marijuana only. One of the interesting things about that law is that it imposed a March 1st, 2016 deadline where if a county or city did not have land use regulations that either regulated or prohibited the cultivation of marijuana, the Department of Food and Agriculture would be the sole licensing authority for those applicants. And so in response to that, you saw a number of jurisdictions throughout the state that actually imposed prohibitions on cultivating cannabis. Humboldt County took a different approach, and shortly after the adoption of the Medical Marijuana Regulatory Safety Act, the Board of Supervisors gave the Planning Department direction to begin an ordinance with the goal of trying to get that in effect before that March 1st deadline. There was over 12 Planning Commission and board meetings, as well as a number of community meetings that were held to work through that ordinance. And ultimately it was adopted on January 26th of 2016. It did impose a deadline for all applications of the end of the year in 2016. Natalynne, is there anything that you want to add about I know you were involved in the process of developing that ordinance somewhat. Do you want to speak to any of that before I move on?
No, why don't you go ahead and then I'll come in afterward.
Okay, sounds good. So one of what we received by the deadline at the end of 2016, 2,336 applications. And it was really interesting to be here during 2016 and watch people come in over that year to apply for cannabis applications. Early on, right after that ordinance was adopted, people would come in and they were very hesitant to talk with us. They were not used to, they weren't used to legalization, right? And so they had been used to hiding, really. And so it really started where we didn't have a whole lot of interest initially, and some people were coming in and not wanting to share details with us. And I think we did a really good job of reassuring them that we were there to help. And ultimately, we got over just under 2,400 applications, and over half of that was within the last 2 weeks of the deadline. So by the end of the year, we had lines out our door of people that were just wanting to throw applications at us. By far, the majority of those were for existing cultivation areas. So of the 2,336 applications that we got, 1,778 were for existing operations. And approximately 2/3 of that was outdoor, 1/3 was mixed light. And really that was the goal of this ordinance. It did establish some parameters where new cultivation could occur, but the primary goal was to get a framework for the county's existing farms. This map is showing you all of the applications that we took in by the end of 2016 under that first cannabis ordinance. And you can see by far the majority of them are located in southern Humboldt, just as you would think. There's almost none that, no cannabis farms were located closer to the coast except for a few in the King Range area. So because the first ordinance had a deadline of 2016 for all applications, the county started a process to create a second ordinance that would allow for new applications. And we went through an environmental impact report, which had extensive scoping meetings with the public and the cannabis community. And over 20 meetings were held before the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, which ultimately resulted in adoption of the commercial cannabis land use ordinance, which we call Ordinance 2.0, in May of 2018. And that did set a deadline of December 31st, 2020 for existing cultivation sites. And that's important because the both ordinances really were intended to help the existing farms to transition into the legal market and into the state regulatory system. And so we really wanted to encourage people to come out and get permitted. And there was a little bit of an easier pathway for permitting for existing farms than for new. So since that ordinance was adopted in 2018, we've received approximately 450 applications, and about half of those were for existing farms, the other half were for new. And again, those are existing applications, not ones that have been approved. So as part of that second ordinance, the county also adopted a cap on cannabis operations in the county, and it's by watershed. We have 12 watersheds for planning purposes in the county, and they're of course broken down into sub-watersheds. But the cap was the Board of Supervisors, and through that environmental analysis, we thought that there would be room for approximately 3,500 permits of cannabis cultivation. Remember, keeping in mind that there was possibly up to 15,000 cannabis cultivation sites prior to 2016, and for a total of 1,205 acres. And what you see here is permits approved by year. You can see that we are nowhere near those caps. These numbers are as of the beginning of the year. So by January of this year, we had approved 1,329 cannabis cultivation permits for 332 acres throughout the county. This table is showing you current permits that are active, and if you'll notice, the 1,027 permits is less than the approved permits that we had on that last slide, and that's a result of a lot of people that have started to withdraw their permits. As you've seen, and we'll talk about more, I think, in this presentation, the cannabis industry has really started to have more difficulty, and we've started to see a number of existing operators give up their permits completely and transition to some other form of business. So also, of the 1,027 permits that were active as of the first of the year, 739 of those were for existing, with another 78 that were existing but maybe expanded somewhat. And so by far, the majority of these permits that the county has issued for cannabis cultivation were existing before 2016. And over half of those are for 10,000 square feet or less. What you'll see here is over a total of only 19 permits have been issued for cannabis cultivation sites over 1 acre, and 189 between half an acre and 1 acre. And the acre is an important threshold, because when the county was going through the cannabis, both ordinances, we established an acre as the maximum cultivation area in most cases. And that was initially something that aligned with the state's licensing framework, where they were going to also hold licenses to 1 acre. And the idea there was to try to preserve the existing operators' ability to compete in the statewide market. And that the state ended up removing that cap of 1 acre. The county still generally has a 1 acre limitation. So a little bit of state context. I know the title of this talk is I think Humboldt County's cannabis industry, we are of the opinion that there really isn't a Humboldt County industry, it's a statewide industry. And so to put it in context, Humboldt County does have 4 farms between 7 and 8 acres. And those are the largest that the county has. Lake County has farms in excess of 60 acres, and Santa Barbara County has farms in excess of 100 acres just for a single farm. So the Humboldt County, when you're talking about a statewide context, does not really have any large farms. So I wanted to share with you some images that we've seen out in the field as we've started to have some hands-on experience with cultivation operations in Humboldt County. So before legalization, before 2016, when there really was no significant regulatory framework for cannabis cultivation sites, people would hide. And this is an image that I think a lot of our cultivators probably saw. What they were trying to do, obviously, is stay under the radar. And so we saw a lot of cultivation areas that were in areas that were not visible from the air, or at least not highly visible. And there's a lot of impacts associated with trying to put those cultivation areas where they wouldn't be seen. You're seeing here a cultivation operation that looks like it's trying to stay somewhat off the radar. And that blue line is a water course. And so, that's not something that we would want to see today, but these are the sort of things that we were seeing in before 2016, before people started to come into the legal framework. This is a water tank that is very clearly camouflaged to be hidden from the air. And water lines were running all throughout some of these sites. These are some other images from sites that we have seen before legalization. And so now that the cannabis farms have started to come into the legal market and actually obtain permits, I wanted to share some slides with you of what we're seeing out in the fields. This is a nice cannabis site here, full sun, outdoor. These are all permitted sites now that I'm going to be showing you. It's another image of some plants that are well contained, and you're starting to see people open up and come out into the more open areas of their properties in areas that are more that are basically better for the environment. We have regulations now that they keep all of their nutrients in contained areas so that you don't have spills, so that they're not seeping into the ground or anything like that. You can see a lot of these cultivation areas are well contained, where runoff is managed. There's erosion control that we're seeing on these farms to keep water quality impacts as minimal as possible. And we started to require and see people move to rainwater catchment as one of their primary water sources. In many cases, a lot of our farms, that is their only source of water for irrigation, is rainwater catchment. We're seeing that in rainwater catchment ponds, and also substantial water tank storage throughout a lot of these farms. It's a requirement of almost all of the county's cannabis permits that they install water meters so that we can track their water use and align that with what the county has both analyzed and permitted. And where generators are being used, there are requirements to house them in containment structures so that both noise is attenuated to appropriate levels, and also fuel is contained if there were spillages. And what we're starting to see is, in most cases, cannabis permits in Humboldt County are being required to convert to solar. And so we're seeing a lot of solar panels that are going out in these farms. Also, a lot of farms are starting to incorporate other aspects that are not just cannabis. We're seeing a lot of cannabis cultivation farms exist with other types of agriculture. One of the things that the cannabis ordinances have done is enabled more appropriate sites to be developed with new cannabis cultivation. So a lot of the flatter areas of the county with access to good services are building more modern cannabis type of operations. And they're also taking advantage of more environmentally friendly cultivation methods, such as planting in the ground. This is a site in Holmes Flat that is taking advantage of the high water table there to actually dry farm. They did not use any water at all in their irrigation. And this is a couple acres, I believe, that has been planted down there in Holmes Flat. That is the end of the presentation that I put together, and I think we'll turn it over to Natalynne and then open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to chat with you a little bit. I do have a bit of a PowerPoint presentation, but I actually have it on my other computer, and I kind of just prefer to be able to see you all and just share. So can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Cliff? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So I do want to introduce myself a bit, which is, yes, I am the executive director of Humboldt County Growers Alliance. We founded HCGA in response to the passage of Proposition 64, so in the November of 2016. However, I think that my past experience is really relevant to this conversation and this discussion. I am a graduate from HSU. I have a degree in environmental science with an emphasis on public policy. And I was able to get my dream job working for an environmental organization for over 8 years immediately after graduating from school. So I worked with the Environmental Protection Information Center, also known as EPIC, starting in 2008. Through that experience, I've learned a great deal about environmental laws, both state and federal, endangered species, water, and clean air. Also a lot of information about roads and road networks. So I brought a lot of that experience, and as the green rush was really coming to bear in 2012, 13, 14, as we were very much seeing the impacts of unregulated cannabis on our wildlife, on our social, on our communities, while there were benefits that came with this rampant unregulated cannabis industry, aka there was a lot of funding and economy that was running through our systems. It really created this high watermark of cash infusion in our economy. It also came at the cost of environment and social issues, and mountaintops and all of this stuff. And so there were many environmental organizations that were saying, we need to do something about this. And early 2015, or I guess actually late 2014 is when Assemblymember Jim Wood and Senator Mike McGuire were newly elected to the state legislature. And coming from the North Coast, they were listening to people here on the North Coast about the problems with unregulated cannabis. And so it was those two assembly legislators, in addition to another assembly member, Rob Bonta, that developed the legislation that Cliff was talking about, Medical Marijuana Regulation Safety Act. So that, I think it's important to understand where that came from. That need to develop a regulatory system came from the North Coast. It came from our two legislators, and it was ultimately signed into law by Jerry Brown. Simultaneous to that, cannabis farmers who were operating during the 215 era, which was California's compassionate use laws, which were passed by voters in 1996, gave farmers that were providing marijuana for medical patients defense from certain types of criminal prosecution. And so it's not that there weren't laws, it's just that there were not regulations. And I think that that is important to remember. So I, in 2015, was working with the Environmental Protection Information Center. Cannabis farmers were organizing. They were coming to the county and said, we don't want to keep doing what we've been doing in the past. The tide is changing. Legalization is coming. This is going to happen. We want to participate. We want to engage. And so cannabis farmers and environmentalists came to the table, a proverbial table, because the cannabis industry was suggesting to write its own rules, its own ordinance to be passed by voters. This kind of, I don't want to call it a public process, but this kind of quasi-public process transpired through 2015, and a lot of conversations were had. Ultimately, the cannabis farmer organization decided to turn over that work to the county. That was right when Jerry Brown had signed MMRSA into law, and a pretty reasonable work in progress was handed over to the county to get started. I personally worked with, from Friends of the Eel River, Scott Greason, Jen Kalt from Humboldt Baykeeper, myself, Dan Erisman from North Coast Environmental Center, as well as Larry Glass. And I say these names because, let me just say, those are 5 sets of very thoroughly scrutinizing environmentalist eyes. And we worked with our county, and we worked through the public process to do our absolute best to make sure that what the county was going to put forward as a regulatory structure was going to protect water quality, environmental, wildlife, prevent water trucking. There was a lot of things that we were really looking out for. One of those things was a concept of out of the forests and onto the farms, and wanting to move, pardon my like kind of flippant terms, you know, we wanted to move the weed out of what we called the steep and deep and onto the flat or agricultural lands. The county came up with a program called the RRR, which was the Retirement Remediation and Relocation Program, which would move projects that were in inferior sited locations down onto flat lands. That is an important thing to remember, because what I think a lot of the public has seen or experienced is what seems like a lot of projects getting moved, places that didn't traditionally have cannabis having cannabis, that they didn't see them before. And that has an impact on people's perception. And I think from a perception standpoint, from a public's perception, it seems like there's all of this new weed being grown, but really that was the environmentally preferred alternative. What we didn't recognize is that there would be social impacts to that. And so areas like Neeland, down in the Carlotta and Hydesville area, the Honeydew River Valley, the Mattole River Valley, areas that didn't typically have cannabis because it wouldn't have been hiding, started to become receiving sites for some of these RRR projects. And so, as Cliff was saying, you know, we worked through this first cannabis land use ordinance. And I think that's what's really important. Again, what Cliff said, there was an estimated 15,000 individual grow sites around this county in 2015. And by the end of 2016, almost 2,400 individuals came forward saying that they were willing to participate in the regulated system, which is 35%. There was probably an estimated 7,000 individual grower businesses with up to about 15,000 sites. So 35% of people said, I'm willing to come in. These are the new rules. I'm willing to follow the rules. And that is huge. That is a big deal. You know, today, 2023, I want to see if anybody wants to put in the chat. Does anybody want to take a guess as to how many illegal grows the sheriff currently estimates there are out around the county? Kind of like Price is Right. Take a guess. How many do you think are still existing today? Someone toss a number over there. put people on the spot.
How about 10,000?
10,000, no, less. There are, according to the sheriff, fewer than 1,500 illegal grows remaining.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. There has been an 86% reduction in cultivation sites around our county since 2015. The county also created a very effective abatement program with its Eyes in the Sky program, and looking around and sent out notices and said, we think you might be cultivating cannabis. Either prove that you're not, or we have to develop a agreement, a program for how to deal with this. The county was very, very effective in that program, and through creating a regulatory pathway and saying you can come in and play by the rules, aka become a green dot, or else you are a red dot. And if you're a red dot, then we are going to have this abatement program, which will address that. I think the county won an award for that, didn't they, Cliff? For their abatement program, recognized through CSAC?
We did, yep.
It also created some irate people who were misidentified. I remember seeing in the paper.
Yes, for better or worse, the abatement program was very effective. I know that here's the certain irony for folks is some people don't think that the county's done enough to eradicate illegal cultivation, and some people in the county thinks that they did too much. So, Cliff, you cannot win. I promise that. You're never going to be able to win. So what I really want to stress is there's this concept, there's this notion that the green rush is just still pervasive, but it is over here in Humboldt County. And I believe it is because our county has done everything it could to allow people to come into compliance. Once they're in the system, then we can, because I helped them as well, but the county in partnership with the agencies and with the farmers can implement all of the appropriate protocols, streamside management area protections, water quality protections, erosion control protections, the amount of surveys that have to be done for wildlife surveys, archaeological surveys, septic surveys, so there's so much that goes into bringing these operators into compliance that I don't think that the public really understands. If anybody has been out or driven around the hills of Southern Humboldt or Eastern Humboldt, or even in like the Petrolia area, you will notice that there is a fraction of the vehicular traffic. The stores are frankly closing, Dinsmore store, these Alder Point stores, the Harris stores. There is that rush is gone. The boom town, that like gold mining, Wild West kind of a feeling that used to be out in the hills just is not there anymore. And so the county, as Cliff said, they worked through the first land use ordinance and then it closed. The goal of that land use ordinance was specifically to bring pre-existing operations into conformance with a small allowance to allow some new cultivation operations. The county did an environmental impact assessment with that, which was challenged and litigated, but it withstood that legal challenge and the county was able to move forward. As Cliff mentioned, there was a second land use ordinance that happened, 24 meetings almost. That had its own environmental impact report that was written. That too was litigated. That too withstood stood legal challenge. So what I found from my own experience is Humboldt County put these cannabis operations through what I called like college prep high school. because it held these operations feet to the fire, and they made them do what effectively is site-specific CEQA for each project. Meanwhile, the rest of the state was just handing out permits kind of willy-nilly. And it was very easy for people to get permits. People would tell me, oh, why is Humboldt doing this? I'm just going to go down to Yolo County. You know, they're just handing out permits left and right. Well, Yolo County is not doing that anymore. Humboldt County has effectively done what no other permitting and jurisdiction has done in this state, which has been to develop an effective land use ordinance, a CEQA compliant land use ordinance, and over the last 8 years has moved, I think 65 or 68% of our county's permits through to full annual licenses with the state, which is really incredible. The county of Mendocino has moved forward 6 out of over 800.
We're impressive.
That's crazy. So Humboldt County, I do not think that this county gets the credit that they deserve for the monumental task that they have been tasked with. And the number of planners, how many planning commission meetings. And so, but this is what I think happens with the public is every 2 weeks on Thursday, we have a planning commission hearing. And sometimes on those planning commission dockets, there might be 20, 25, maybe even 30 permits that are seeking approval. Well, those permits have been in process for between maybe 2 years and upwards of 5 years to come to that point of decision and requesting approval through a public hearing. And as Cliff said, almost 70-something% of all of the permits are for pre-existing operations. And so who has actually moved through this system and how many still remain? And so, as I mentioned, and Cliff mentioned, almost 2,400 people signed up to become legal cannabis businesses. We estimate today that there are about 775-ish cannabis cultivation businesses in this county. So if we take 70% of that, I'm going to just do some quick math. I'm doing it. I'm sorry, you're going to get it on the fly. Divided by, times 581 divided by 2,400. 75% of the people who signed up to come into compliance have already fallen off the map. We've lost 75% of people who signed up to say that they wanted to come into compliance have exited.
Why do you think that happened? And is it because of the cost of coming into compliance, the cost of putting in the roads, putting in the water?
The cost,
system?
sometimes the site, to bring the site into conformance would be financially infeasible. So unfortunately, and this is kind of a misnomer, you know, we talk a lot about wanting to support mom and pop operations, but the smaller the operation or the less capacity they had, they ran out of funds. They could not hire the consultants to do the archaeology studies, the botany studies, the wildlife studies. It doesn't matter what size farm you are. If you're bringing an archaeologist out to do a survey, the price is the same. A larger operation can better amortize the cost of those surveys than a small operation. And so the costs, really, I spent a lot of time in 2016 working to encourage people to come into compliance. We talked about things, it's the right thing to do. I really wish I could have gone back in time and said, are you ready to be a California state licensed business? Do you understand what that means? Yes or no? These are all of the laws that you have to follow to be a licensed business in California. These are all of the laws that you have to follow to be a California licensed cannabis business as well. And these are all of the federal provisions that you are still held to, like no access to banking, antiquated IRS code called 280E that does not allow cannabis businesses to write off normal costs of business. Are you prepared for all of that? You know, are you willing to take the risk of going into a completely experimental business in California, the most regulated operating environment in the nation? So I do think that of those 75%, they dropped off for many different reasons. But that is what has happened. We have lost 75% of our pre-existing operators. And to me, that is the cultural heritage of this community. That is what makes Humboldt truly unique and different from other places like Lake County or Santa Barbara County that are new operators. They don't have the story. Humboldt County cannabis is world renowned. It has been for decades. And it is world renowned because people have come here from all over the world to participate in the cultivation of cannabis. We often call them termigrants, and then they go back out around the world and they talk about their experience. Humboldt County has unique genetics. We have a traditional know-how of different cultivation practices, and it is that makes Humboldt truly unique. I see a comment also, overproduction and low prices. So as Cliff mentioned, when Proposition 64 was passed by voters, there was a promise in there that there would be a 1 acre cap. That acre cap was surreptitiously removed due to the influence of money and politics in the California system. There's no two ways to say it other than that. That acre cap was removed, which then allowed for the large scale production of cannabis all across the state. Does anybody remember that Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom came to Garberville in spring of 2015 with their Blue Ribbon Commission? Anybody hear about that or remember that?
No.
Well, Gavin Newsom came here and they promised that the cannabis industry that California was going to develop was going to be built based on the people who had given their blood, sweat, and tears to cultivate a plant that we have now recognized and realized was the criminalization of the cultivation of this plant was wrong. That is why the war on drugs is ending. That is why legalization is happening across the United States, with 38 out of 50 having some form of medical framework for adult use or medical marijuana. The war on drugs was a failure, and they made promises that we were going to create a pathway for legacy operations to become the backbone. As I mentioned, that Prop 64, the acre cap was removed, and that unleashed the rest. And so simple supply and demand economics and frankly, the state of California is authorizing production that amounts to 4 or 5 times more than its legal consumption capacity. Where is it going? If it can't be consumed in the state of California, where is it going?
Other states, obviously.
And what is that called?
That's illegal.
That is called interstate trafficking. People go to federal prison for that. And the state of California, I'm saying it, has fundamentally allowed the overproduction of cannabis in its own state. Oops. Oops. for what it's worth, markets do correct themselves. If a regulating body will not do it, a market will correct itself. And frankly, low prices is a market correction. And there are significant amounts of cultivation areas that are coming offline. As I already mentioned, there's cultivation coming offline in Humboldt. There's cultivation that's coming offline in other parts of the state. And frankly, it's because it's not as lucrative as certain venture capitalists thought it was going to be, and they're pulling out. So I'm going to take a breath, take a little sip. I know I can.
You're most welcome to do that. You're doing great.
Awesome. So I do want, Jane, you had asked about taxes and economy. So when the county adopted the first land use ordinance, it also adopted a taxing structure, which was seemed very perfectly simple when we worked on this. $1, $1, $2, and $3 a square foot, and we'll tax based on the cultivation type. As it coming on from the cannabis side, we were supportive of it. You know, it was like, that's our opportunity to give back to the county. And county adopted this, voters adopted it. And in 4 years, the cannabis industry contributed over $48.5 million to the county's general fund. Unfortunately, having a flat rate tax like that does not adjust when the production, when the value of the product goes down. And so as mentioned, the value of the cannabis pound went down. I mean, it went down by about 5 times. It was a fifth the price when prohibition was propping up the price per pound.
It was what, originally over $2,000 per pound?
It was up to $4,000 or $5,000 a pound.
Oh, it was? Yeah, and now it's down to about what, 1,000?
About $300 a pound.
300? No wonder everybody's going broke.
$300 a pound, which in many cases is lower than the cost of production. Because once you add in all of the licensing costs, the permitting costs, the annual renewals, the weights and measures, everything that has to go in to maintaining this state licensed business, plus then inputs, farm labor, legal farm labor, workman's comp insurance, and then you can't write anything off due to 280E. These are failing economic businesses. There is almost no reason except out of pure stubbornness and sheer determination to work through this, because the last few years, it has not made sense to run a cannabis business. So cannabis industry contributed significantly, almost $50 million to the general fund. But when the market crashed, cannabis industry came together, went to the supervisors and said, look, we need help. The board ultimately reduced that tax by 85%. People paid that rate, paid the tax in at the 15% rate. And then we went back to them about 6 months later when the county said that they were going to reevaluate, and they agreed to do a full suspension for 2 years to give the county and the industry breathing room to be able to come out of this extreme market correction. All cannabis farms continue to pay property taxes. They pay income tax. Cannabis is taxed throughout the supply chain in the form of excise tax that goes into the state. Unfortunately, those funds do not come back to licensing jurisdictions. That was built in part of Prop 64. There's a couple questions. So I'm going to talk about, long-term outlook. What we grow here in Humboldt is what is considered craft cannabis. It is artisanally grown. It is primarily sun-grown. 98% of our operations are sun-grown cannabis. They're small farms. These are real people with families, a lot of homestead farms. A lot of cannabis that's being grown through regenerative practices. Cliff showed some pictures with animals and food production. We grow something that is really, truly unique here. But we have a constrained market. We can only sell in California. And frankly, the people in LA are weird. I'm from LA, I can say that. You know, you want to buy weed from rappers or from influencers, and the public, generally speaking, is looking at weed based on THC values, which is like going to the liquor store and buying the most potent alcohol by volume. It really makes no sense. It doesn't actually take into consideration people's experience. Unfortunately, we're in an emerging market. We don't, as farmers, have access to our customers. We do not have access to direct-to-consumer sales. We as HCGA are working in partnership with Assemblymember Pellerin from the Santa Cruz area on a direct-to-consumers, farmer direct sales through events, which would be like a farmer's market style opportunity. That will be the third time we've attempted this legislation. So we're really hoping it doesn't get opposed, or it doesn't. We hope it moves forward this time, unlike the other two times that it's been fought and broken.
What is the legislation that you're trying to pass?
It would allow farmer direct sales at state licensed events. So instead of only being able to sell to a retailer where we have no idea who our customers are, it would allow us to open up and know who your customer is. Just like a farmer that goes to the Arcadis farmers market and they sell tomatoes, and I can shake your hand when I sell you the tomatoes and you hand me cash, I hand you tomatoes. We can't do that. We can't.
Right now, you have to go through dispensaries, right?
We have to go through a distributor to a dispensary. We do not know who our customers are.
So there are two intervening people. There's a distributor. You go to a distributor. The distributor does what? And
It
then
sells it to a retailer. All of the product is sold on consignment. We don't get cash in hand. So product leaves a farm, it goes to a distributor. The distributor sends it down the supply chain, probably to another distributor, who then someone puts it in some packaging, and then it's sold at a retailer. And then once the customer buys it, then the money probably moves back to the farmer. We operate in a very kind of broken supply chain model. We need direct to consumer access, which is why Congressman Huffman has championed legislation with us called the SHIP Act, which is the Small Homestead and Independent Producers Act. He introduced it to Congress last year. We, of course, have a new Congress, and they're about to reintroduce it this year. The goal with that would be to allow farmers under 1 acre to be able to sell direct once federal legalization opens up. We are very grateful for our relationship with the congressman to champion that type of legislation. So in the future, we need to develop our craft. We have a craft industry, but we need access to consumers. That's why we're working through state legislation. That's why we're working through federal legislation. People do want what we are growing. And once we have access to people, I think of something like Etsy, where you can then buy products from small producers, and that will happen. That can happen. It's just not today and it's not tomorrow. So there will be a market for what Humboldt is doing. So we need to protect what is here and understand that there is a pathway, and there is a future. It's just right now it's a lot of bit challenging. So we're trying not to, our mission at HCGA is to preserve, protect, and enhance Humboldt County's world-renowned cannabis industry. But right now we're mostly at preserve and protect. We'll get to enhancement. Again, take a breath. I do want to maybe move over to the Humboldt Cannabis Reform Initiative. Should I do that? Move over there, Jane?
Yeah, talk about first the economics In other words, why is it just the federal legislation that is stopping the direct marketing? Because will we have to pass federal legislation authorizing cannabis legality in order to have the direct
Yeah.
population? Okay.
Yeah, so the federal government needs to deschedule cannabis from a Schedule I controlled substance. We need access to banking. There's a banking reform law that is being considered. We need interstate commerce, not interstate trafficking. It's all a work in progress. That's national politics. We do not have a lobbyist in DC. There's a lot of other players there, but we also really need people in DC to understand cannabis as agriculture, not as like a pharmaceutical. So there's a lot of work that's being done to educate on that level. But economically, I'm pleased to report that our organization is working in partnership with Cal Poly Humboldt and Sonoma State University on a grant to study the economics of it's a North Coast Cannabis Economic Assessment. Dr. Robert Eiler from Sonoma State University is leading that analysis. There's currently an open survey going on, and cannabis operations in Sonoma, Mendocino, Humboldt, Trinity, Del Norte, and Lake County are participating. And this will be the first of its kind analysis of what the cannabis industry brings to the North Coast. Previously there's been some attempt to really gather and understand the size of the economic value of this industry, but because it's been unregulated, it is much harder to study. But I think that Jennifer Budwig, who's with Redwood Capital Bank, estimated in 2010 that over 25% of the gross domestic product of Humboldt was cannabis derived, which I think was about $500 million a year. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to perfectly quote that, but the amount of people who have been involved with the industry, whether they were directly cultivating or working in ancillary support, trimming, working out on a farm, or they even, let's say, had a home grow, the amount of economics and value that, if someone's getting paid a couple $100s to trim a pound of weed, then they made an extra $800. They're then spending that in their local economy. And so, many of you would remember the 2008 housing crisis. Like, we didn't feel that recession that happened around the nation here. Whatever's happening in the national economy, that cash is no longer here. Like, I do have worries about our small business community not getting the infusions of cash that formerly supported our restaurants, our shops, our the secondary, accountants, all the professional level. I mean, that extra money is not here anymore. And I really do worry about our small businesses and how those are going to be supported moving forward as the county itself adapts and evolves to new economies. We've got Cal Poly Humboldt. I'm excited about that. Offshore wind, maybe a fish farm. We've got these other things. So it's not that just cannabis is the only thing at all by any means. We have an emerging tourism sector, but cannabis is a fundamental, important part of our economy, and not having that cash circulating through is really, it is going to be felt if businesses are not already feeling it.
So it's happening, but you just don't know how serious it is, how severe it is, and that's what that study will tell you?
That's what the study will tell us. I mean, I've heard from the supervisors that Humboldt, Del Norte, Humboldt, Trinity, and Mendocino have sales tax revenue that are down 13, depending on whether you're in city or rural, within our Emerald Triangle region, down almost 20% compared to other parts of the state. And that is a direct, most likely a direct correlation to what's happening with the cannabis industry in these three counties that had so much cannabis as part of their economy.
We have an enormous growth of dispensaries here, and are they surviving, or are they losing so much business to other businesses that they aren't doing well? I know HPRC, for example, closed its Eureka office because there was too much competition.
Yeah, I do think it's kind of funny, but it does turn out that you can sell sand at the beach. I who would have thought, but I mean, there's just a new dispensary is just opening as well. And people, when tourists come here, they stop at these dispensaries also. They're like, oh, I'm in Humboldt. I'm gonna go buy some weed. So it turns out you can sell sand at the beach, and generally speaking, maybe you don't need 2 dispensaries, but they're doing okay. So I see a question. Is there any reason to think that the supply demand situation will improve for Humboldt County? Yes, I do. And that is because the state of California requires site-specific CEQA compliance for all cannabis operations. And as I mentioned before, there were a lot of permitting jurisdictions around the state that were just handing out permits like sandwich forms. They didn't do their due diligence. They didn't do their homework to begin with, unlike Humboldt. And so now there's many of these licensing jurisdictions like Monterey and Salinas that are they can't meet their state required obligations. And so the state said, if you have a farm over 1 acre, if you don't have your CEQA documents, we're not going to renew you. And so we're losing significant cultivation that's coming out of the Salinas area, where some of the largest has been grown. It's down in the Santa Barbara area. There's a lot of competing interests, and people didn't like all of this new weed that was being grown down there. And so Santa Barbara is also losing quite a bit of cultivation. So I do think that there will be some kind of balance and equilibrium reached. Jane asks about cannabis tourism. So Humboldt County, in our cannabis permitting, there is, anytime you want to have the public through a public accommodation on a property, you need to analyze and make sure that there's not going to be traffic impacts to your neighborhood, that there's not going to be noise impacts, that the sanitation is taken care of, that you have adequate water, that you've done all of these things to make sure that if you're going to bring people to your property, that the public health, public safety, and the environment are protected, which also includes your neighbors. And so the county has a permit to review whether or not a farm is appropriately cited for cannabis tourism. There are 3 permitted cannabis farms in the county that accept public accommodation. And all 3 of those businesses are using that tourism money to diversify their income. Because as mentioned, cannabis, if you're only selling flower, the economics of that don't make sense. The only way that cannabis businesses are surviving today is through diversified income, whether they're growing food, whether they're accepting tourism, whether they're selling nursery stock, aka clones, someone's getting a second job, that kind of way. So the only way cannabis operations are existing is through diversification. Cannabis tourism is a huge opportunity. I think that there's incredible opportunity to highlight a few regions of our county. Specifically, I think from Redway out to Shelter Cove, that Bryceland Thorn stretch has a wonderful opportunity. There's farms along certain areas of Avenue of the Giants, like where Cliff showed that picture where the dry farming is happening. We have areas out in Willow Creek as well. Those are all areas that are accessible, where you can build upon existing tourism activities and include cannabis as part of the experience. I do think that there's a lot of opportunity, but it is also like a farmer can't just be like, oh, I'm going to open up a farm stand and just start letting tourists come out to my property. No, they have to get a permit for that. It has to be analyzed. Cliff isn't going to just be like, sure, go for it, Bob. It's actually usually a discretionary permit as well. So it does have to be, that's probably why there's not more cannabis tourism permits, is because they just haven't had the capacity to go forward through that. What is the current volume of cannabis tourism compared to other tourism? You know, that's starting to be an emerging area of study. I don't have any data on it, but I do think that, let's just be honest, cannabis is an intoxicant. It is an adulterant. It changes how the person who consumes it feels. So does my cup of coffee. So does a glass of wine. So does a beer. So does a martini. People use cannabis to change their outlook and they go out and they enjoy food or the redwoods or that beautiful ocean view a little bit more. People need to know and understand how to safely consume cannabis. They need to make sure that they're not driving under the influence. But yes, cannabis is becoming more of an emerging tourism value. People can enjoy it while doing other things, as well as, I mean, frankly, people want to come out and see our really big, beautiful pot plants because they don't have that in other places. Okay. So Jane says, how are growers responding to the new cannabis initiative, and what exactly is that initiative? So I want to share my screen for just a second, and I'm going to just run through some of this stuff really quickly because I'm not going to go through all of it. So some of you may have heard about the Humboldt Cannabis Reform Initiative. This is a citizen initiative. It was written in late 2021 by a small group of people from the Neyland area. They hired a San Francisco attorney to write a ballot initiative. And what this thing does specifically is it creates a whole new section for the Humboldt County General Plan that doesn't currently exist. It's called Section 4.9 Cannabis Cultivation. It creates a host of new definitions in the general plan. It sets new goals and policies, and it is a regulatory document.
Question, are you showing a slide, or if so, it's not visible?
Cliff, can you see this slide? Maybe see that slide? It says you, oh, the shared screen can only be seen by co-hosts.
No, I'm seeing it.
That explains it.
Oh, weird. So I'll use my slide over here because I do think it gets a little bit distracting. So the Humboldt Cannabis Reform Initiative, what it does is it creates a whole new section for the county's general plan. Okay. Did anybody here work on the county's general plan update over the, I don't know, 15 years or so that the county went through that process? Anybody work on that general plan update component? Well, creating a whole new section in the county general plan is a big deal. That is done without any public process. There were thousands of hours that went into the public process to create the county general plan. There is nothing in the county's general plan for the rural lands area, forest lands, or agricultural lands that are prescriptive policies for how industries are regulated. Zero. The HCRA amends the county general plan. It inserts a whole new section, section 4.9 cannabis, which specifically regulates how cannabis, separately from any other industry, is addressed in a guidance document. So that's first and foremost. It then also amends all of Humboldt County's local coastal plans and amends sections of the county's cannabis land use ordinance. why does that matter? As a person who values transparency in public process, when a small group of people are able to draft new laws that the public has no ability to review, the transparent, no organization that I have spoken to across this county or agency had the opportunity to read those 32 pages of new documentation before it was submitted to the elections office to start securing votes or start securing signatures to go before the ballot. There are aspects of this policy that can only be changed by express voters. It has to go back to the voters. And so what will happen is, I promise you, no matter what, and I've been doing public policy for 15 years, there are going to be problems. There's going to be different ways that these things can be interpreted. There are going to be errors. There's going to be things that are called unintended consequences. I have worked on multiple pieces of legislation, and every single time there's been unintended consequences. Triple R program, unintended consequences. And so if you bake something in and then you cannot change it, except for going back to the voters, that is a fundamental flaw. That's not how you create good policy. That is not how we're still coming out of a prohibition. We need our laws to remain flexible, adaptable, and we need to be able to evolve with the times. And if any creature is not able to evolve with the times, it goes extinct. HCRI has fundamental flaws. There's ambiguities to it, and how that document is interpreted by real people, because policymakers, planning staff, judges, and lawyers are all real people, and all people have and can read words differently. And so that's what it is. That's what it does. We think that the initiative was given a misleading title, that it would only restrict new cannabis cultivation for large scale growth. Proponents were out there at the farmers market, at the county fair, etc., saying, help us protect small farmers. This will protect small farmers. Unfortunately, there are provisions in this document that affect every single currently licensed farmer of every size, no matter what. And so it's not just about new grows or preventing new grows. It has impacts on every single farm over 3,000 square feet that currently exists. And that is a fundamental challenge. So what are the supervisors responding to this initiative? So because the proponents secured an adequate number of signatures, the supervisors are left with two choices. They could either adopt it as is, or they could put it to the voters. This document is going to the voters on March 5th, 2024. The county had to, either put it to voters or adopt it. The county asked the planning staff to develop an analysis. In March, the county published its analysis based on its interpretation of how it would implement this document. And frankly, as I'm saying, there would be impacts. You cannot get around language. And I'm sorry, but intent and the words on the paper don't work. So judges only see and read the words on paper. They don't look at legislative intent. And so even if certain things were not intended to be interpreted a certain way, the words on paper are how the county has to respond to it. And when the county, it says 1 permit per person per parcel, or how the initiative shows what expanded area are, there's problems. So county requested a planning analysis that was published on the 7th of March. The Board of Supervisors developed an ad hoc committee. And so that is Supervisors Arroyo and Bushnell meeting with the proponents as well as Director Ford. The question was whether or not the proponents would be willing to withdraw the initiative and work through some other means. I see that Elizabeth Watson is on here. I know that all of the meetings have been had. Maybe there is the potential that this initiative could be withdrawn, and that the public could go through a meaningful process to engage their concerns without putting what I would basically consider a problematic policy document that amends the general plan to voters in a way that locks the cannabis industry frozen in time, so we are not able to adapt and evolve through pending federal legalization.
The initiative will not be withdrawn.
Well, that's pretty definitive. So what are the alternatives? Can the industry put together an alternative initiative over time working with the county in order to provide an alternative that would work for the county and the industry?
Yes, I'll say fundamentally, I do not, as a person again who studied public policy, I do not like citizen initiatives. I do not think that they create good policy. So I would not recommend, nor would I support the industry writing its own initiative, nor would I recommend, just that kind of a thing. Cliff showed a slide that was called the county caps slide. It was resolution 18-43. Let's get super nerdy and super wonky. The county has zero plan to increase cultivation by triple cultivation that currently exists. The county does not have a plan for that. Yes, there is an aged document, that resolution 18-43. My personal recommendation is that the Board of Supervisors direct planning staff to revise that resolution through a public process, through the Planning Commission, like we do. The community can come to the table and say whether or not we want to allow more new cultivation, how big and where. That document can get amended, and either the Board of Supervisors can either adopt it as is, as the Planning Commission produces that document again with public participation, or the supervisors could put that to voters. Because if what people really do not want to see is more new cultivation, there is a simpler, more streamlined way of doing it instead of amending the Humboldt County General Plan and then not allowing that document to be amended in the future without a vote of the people.
This is going to be interesting. And it's going to take, you have between now and next March?
Right. So DKFO Forge, I would encourage you, I'll put a link to the county's analysis over in the sidebar right now. I encourage you to read the county's analysis on what it says and how it would impact.
And where do we find that?
How it would interpret this. Definitely take a look at that. Julie Fulkerson, how is it that the Supervisor Bushnell can be involved in this process? How is that not a violation of the Brown Act? The Brown Act prevents more than 3 supervisors from discussing things simultaneously. There's only been 2 supervisors, Arroyo and Bushnell, have been meeting with the proponents and Director John Ford. There's, to the best of my knowledge, not going to be any additional meetings, and the board, those that ad hoc committee will report back to the larger board to make decisions and direction. No, the board, you have to adopt the language as is written. There's no changing it. There's no amending it. This thing is done. There's no negotiation. You as voters, we are placed in a binary situation. Black, white, yes, no. That's it. As Elizabeth says, it's going to the vote. Your only choice is yes or no. It's not, well, it's pretty good. You either have to accept all of it and swallow all of it or swallow none of it. It will have impacts to Humboldt's cannabis industry. It will have impacts to our future cannabis tourism. It will have impacts to our environment. It will have impacts to our economy. All of those things will happen.
And the analysis is in the link you gave us on the chat room.
Yes,
That's the county's analysis.
that is the county's analysis, and you could and should. The county is the entity that will interpret. They are the expert in the room. And yes, I know we could get into a really fun situation. And I say fun, like in a sarcastic fun, where it's like the county could hire an independent analysis. You know, right now there's been one document, and now there's an analysis of that. And then I'll say this, the proponents just came out with an analysis of the analysis. And I'm sure the board could come out with an analysis of analysis of analysis. But that's what happens when there's ambiguity is, well, I read it this way, I read it this way, I read it this way, I read it this way. So we're kind of in that state right now of how would this document impact the operators. No, the board cannot change it a year later. There's certain implementing components that they could change, but significant portions, especially the part that is section 4.9, which is the whole first half of the document, cannot be changed without going back to the voters. The whole part that is section 4.9, which goes into the general plan, can only be changed by the voters.
How does it affect the coastal zone or coastal commission?
There's not much cannabis that's allowed in any area that has jurisdiction in the coastal zone.
Okay.
Peter, you ask, no, I don't think our farmers, our legal farmers, are not going back to the black market. They have their fingerprints are on file, their APNs are on file. They have given everything to become legal operators. They are not going back underground. They're going to leave. They're going to go do something else. They're going to be done. We are going to lose the most, frankly, obedient, compliant, willing community members who have given everything over the last 8 years to not put their families through, many of them, what they went through as second generation operations. They are going to just stop. They are going to exit. And what I have concerns about is right now our hills are actually fairly well monitored by legal, compliant, obedient farms. And when they exit and when they stop doing the fire remediation, the road maintenance, the culvert replacement, the forest thinning, the maintaining their ponds that the firemen use for water, an unsavory crowd is going to be invited back into the county.
That's a pretty dire prediction.
I think that it's going to have the opposite impact of what we want.
So do you have any suggestions as to what we as the public can do to influence this situation?
I will not be shy. I will say that the HCRI is eventually going to get a letter. It might be measure A or measure B or something like that. I will frankly ask for a no vote on that measure. I think that there are better ways of producing policy documents. I think that there's better ways of getting our needs met. And we don't have to take this draconian approach that locks us into a paradigm that is not going to be helpful in the long run.
All right. Well, that's incredible, an incredible discussion of this whole issue. And I really appreciate you've been extremely articulate and informative. And does anybody have any questions that we haven't hit or haven't hit in the chat room? Oh, I see there's one new message. Thank you. Hey, thank you, Works. We thank you a great deal and wish you the best of luck with this, because it is certainly affecting friends and neighbors in our economy and having a tremendous impact. So I want to thank you both for all your preparation and all the information you provided, and want to let you know that on May 1st, which is next week, wonderful, it's going to be warmer. We're going to have a talk by Reese Hughes on late spring and summer walks, where he will explore local trails to learn where to see flowers, take advantage of low tides, visit new trails, and enjoy favorites. So thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care now, and good luck on this huge problem.